Hi guys, today we're going to talk about fuck ups. Yes, you've heard it right. I have a feeling we all love successful and inspiring stories like the TEDx ones. And by the way, I have nothing against TEDx. I think it's a great format. But in all businesses, mistakes happen. Also in product development. But we are not used to talking about failures or mistakes. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today with my guest, Peter, the CPO of Nomtek. Hi, Peter. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello.
I know what Nomtek is. Obviously, it's Nomtek's YouTube channel. But if someone from the audience doesn't know, could you please describe Nomtek and its history? And also, could you tell us more what kind of company is it and what we're up to?
Absolutely. Right. So if you ask me what Nomtek is and what we do actually, so we are a digital product studio that focuses on building digital products that are great. And by great, I mean two things: that they serve users and make their lives better in any shape or form, and they are also a viable business. So I guess those two components are important part of what we do. However, if you ask us why we do what we do, maybe the best way to describe this is to tell a little bit of Nomtek history. So we started 11 years ago, and our initial passion was to build bulletproof, the best possible software out there in the world. Because our assumption was that if we build an efficient software, we'll be able to solve problems. We'll be able to build great products. And actually, what we have discovered is, despite the fact that our software we have created was great, unfortunately, a lot of products we have been building, they end up failing. And we sort of thought, okay, why is this happening? What can we still do to make it even better? And we sort of realized that there's two components of success. One is software efficiency, but another one is business validation and user friendliness, being close to people, being human-centric. So we sort of navigated more towards this space as well, to ensure that we are able to understand products from much more holistic perspective than just software, in order to create great digital products that really have the potential to have a lot of life in them.
Sounds like you learned a lot during those 11 years. Could you tell us how many products or projects did you manage to accomplish during this long history?
Yeah, I guess it will be around 150 of them. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so Peter, taking your experience with product, what are the biggest challenges or difficulties when developing a product?
The fundamental challenge is around identifying which part of your product vision is great, and you should double down on this, but also, painfully enough, which part of your product vision is just crazy, because every product vision has these two components, this ice and fire component in them. So this realization that you actually may have part of your vision which is really, really bad, and people don't get it, they don't understand why you do what you do, they don't want to buy it, this bad part of your vision or this weak part of your vision. And getting rid of this and instead focusing on the great part, I guess this is the biggest challenge a lot of product face. And I guess this is a life or death decision at some stage to be able to choose the right path.
Right. And how often mistakes really happen in product development? Are they an integral part of this process, or is there any way to avoid them?
Yeah, so I guess it's very much about the definition of a mistake.
Yeah.
So if you consider a mistake to be a mistake, which is something bad or something that you should avoid, then normally what you do is you actually try to avoid them.
Yeah.
And then actually what we have observed a lot of times at Nomtek is when you sort of postpone lessons learned, suddenly you end up with a one big mistake that even kills the product. However, the other path is to consider mistake to be a lessons learned, which is an integral part of the process. So if you fail fast, if you learn at every single product iteration, suddenly mistakes are just sort of interesting friends. They may tell you bad things about you, or they may tell you sad truths about the product, but they are there for a reason. They are there to steer you towards greatness instead of just being in your own vision, being in your own reality.
Right, so they seem more friendly than a foe than as we initially thought.
Absolutely, they should be befriended.
Yeah. What kind of mistakes are probable to occur, for example, in startups? Which are the most common, and is there any way to categorize them?
I guess there's like three types of major mistakes, and one of the category may sound strange because this basically means that you shouldn't do software until absolutely necessary. Because even though we run a software development company, oftentimes what we have observed is scope creep. Too much of a software kills products. Why? Because the body of the product itself is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're forgetting about validation. Because software is so tempting as an entity. You focus on this so much. You sort of try to polish up this button, try to have this better version of this screen. You spend so much time in your room, in your sticky notes, and suddenly it all gets so big that you have no chances to pivot because of the scope creep. So scope creep before validation sounds like a pretty important category of product failures. Another one, maybe a bit more specific to mobile apps, which is still a very important part of our business. And a common mistake in building mobile apps is making them the exact copy of the website. So a lot of people say, okay, I want a mobile app. This is the website features, just build the mobile app. Here are the features. Mobile apps and websites, they are maybe not fundamentally different, but there is a subtle difference in terms of the feature set, in terms of how they approach people. And the way they are different can be categorized by mobile moments. So apps have mobile moments in them. You pull up your mobile device, you see your screen, and you need to be given instantaneous value, as opposed to the website that typically requires bigger screen, that typically requires a bit more attention time. So identifying so-called mobile moments, or lack of identification of so-called mobile moments in mobile app creation, is another type of mistake, because they just are no different to the website. They need to have a separate DNA, mobile apps, I mean. And a third one, I guess it will be more about the business model. So pivoting too late or too broadly may be also a pretty common cause of product failure or even product death. Because on one hand, you need to be flexible enough to change the course depending on the actual direction that you have learned from your validated learnings after each sprint. But at the same time, pivot is a very painful moment in the product history or life cycle. Right. So a lot of people try to avoid them as much as possible, and suddenly it's too late because
you face the wall.
And they face the wall. There is no runway, and they don't have enough courage or just the capacity to pivot. That's one thing, pivoting too late. However, sometimes people also think that if they want to pivot, I've been told that I need to pivot, so I'm pivoting, but suddenly they pivot too broadly. I mean, they forget about the legacy that the product has created in the past. They forget about the richness they have created, and they instead focus on something absolutely new, which is also sort of a mistake, because pivot should allow you to stay solid with your product, at least with a couple of hypotheses about your value, and suddenly make a very swift move in another parts of your value that are not actually great. So coming back to this metaphor of crazy and great components of every single product, so pivoting should allow you to get rid of the crazy parts of your product, but still have the great parts inherent. And I guess forgetting about this and pivoting too broadly sometimes causes failures as well.
Right. Interesting. Can we dig deeper into the background of those failures? Do you think there are any specific reasons behind it? Is it more of a strategy issue, or is it technology, or is it just us humans?
Yeah, I guess it's all about us humans. So maybe I'll focus on the actual traits of psychology or just aspects of psychology that are driving some of those failures. And maybe I'll focus on two areas. So one would be around the fear of unknown, around the anxiety of challenging the new path.
Staying put in that comfort zone we all love so much, right?
Exactly, staying in the comfort zone, exactly. So this is actually this dilemma of, or the comfort that the comfort zone that building software itself brings you. Because you may believe that you are innovator, you are building something great, you have this great team of people working in this room, you have the wall full of sticky notes, you have everything out there, which brings you joy and passion, so much that you actually sometimes forget about getting out of this building and validating whether this hyped group of people that are attempting to build something great, do they actually challenge themselves with with people who have no clue about the product, who have no clue about the product vision. They actually most likely don't even care about what you're creating, and ensuring that they are able to be motivated to use the product, and they, even more importantly, they are able to be motivated to pay for the product because they see that this serves them in a very nice manner. This is, I guess, a very critical trait of character you need to be able to challenge your comfort zone and go out despite the luxury of staying in your room and building software. So that's I guess one aspect of it. And another one would be something about kind of comparable to the previous one. So staying within your ego zone. So a lot of people, they are afraid of validating their vision, of keeping iterating or keeping asking themselves a question: am I actually building something of value? Am I actually building something that changes people's lives for the better in any shape or form? So this requires a lot of courage, and this requires a lot of tolerance towards the ego, that your ego is not there. You should actually confront the ego with the humbleness of understanding the other people next to you. And I guess the realization that some part of your vision is actually not liked is pretty hard for a lot of founders. It's pretty hard for a lot of business owners to say, okay, my great child, this is my cherished child, and I need to say that this is something wrong with it.
Yeah, I think we've all encountered the founder ego. And I understand it can be really hard to kind of stay in the humble zone, but also have enough courage to face what you've made, and also the opinion of others.
Absolutely, yeah.
But do you think, given our perfectionist nature sometimes, do you think it's possible to avoid these mistakes at all? And is there any way to prepare or secure a project from them appearing?
I guess mistakes have to be befriended, and they have to be called an inherent part of the process, inherent part of the product development process. But maybe so that they don't sound pessimistic, they should be called learnings or lessons learned, product validation, whatever, right?
Yes.
So what we have observed in great product teams is that they are not only focusing on software creation itself. So they don't say, yeah, job done, we have created those features, but they also say, okay, the job is actually done when the features are needed and people actually make good use of them. And this cannot be done without any lessons learned. This cannot be done without any validations. And oftentimes people realize that the great working features, they are actually not needed and they need to get rid of them so that the product is much more lean instead of being full with unnecessary features. So cutting the long story short, I guess mistakes are absolutely part of the process. However, a good strategy would be to sort of avoid having one big mistakes and instead have a product development process that focusing on small lessons learned every single iteration, every single week or every single second week, so that basically you have a book full of lessons learned instead of one big shot of a problem that you may get without any of those realizations.
That can really discourage your process.
Absolutely.
So I think we're developing a slight silver lining around failures. But what would you say percentage-wise? How many projects fail and don't recover if you experience such a failure?
I guess percentage-wise, I would even say it's around 90% of the sad truth is around 90% of the digital products. Yeah. But I guess it depends how you define it. What is success? What is failure? Because sometimes a success is understanding that failure was an inherent consequence. So I guess the good news about like fuck up friendly process is that you can quickly identify that you fall into this 90% of product graveyard category, and you may have enough courage, enough capacity, enough strength to move towards this 10% that remains. So yeah, that's sometimes you cannot do nothing better for the product than just killing the idea. However, oftentimes there's always some aspect of this idea that can be still worked on and in the new environment, which sort of moves this from this graveyard area to this product success area. But
also taking us back to the pivot, not to pivot too broadly, but sometimes pivot only so slightly and then modify the process as we go.
Absolutely. So there's always this flexibility you need to have.
Great.
Yeah.
And is a fuck up also a word that is familiar to Nomtek crew?
Yeah, I guess it is. So our culture is pretty open. Our culture is pretty honest. We try to really sort of say the truth about the things without any second thoughts, anything that will blur the image. So we are very open in saying, hey, this part of your product stinks, or hey, we have fucked up, or we have really made a mistake. So I guess this transparency in communication is super important to us, and which means it's definitely part of our dictionary.
Amazing. I think such transparency is to be appreciated and is a model that one should follow. And could you share with us some more detailed obstacles you encountered when working on projects at Nomtek?
Yeah, sure. So I'm thinking of two examples right now. So the first one will be for the product we worked on that is called Switch. Switch is a two-sided marketplace that provides the best well-being and fitness options for people in Dubai.
Okay.
So if you basically want to go out and have some cool things for your soul or for your body, you could find some fitness providers in the city. This was the initial vision. So two-sided marketplace, supply side providers, demand side people who want to make their life better. And as you can imagine, two-sided marketplace are very complex products to build, because essentially there's two products to be built. There's a supply side of the business and there's a demand side of the business. And we had this big debate, what is an MVP for this product? Because what is the minimum viable product? And we ended up that if we want to build a proper MVP, it's going to take us 3 to 4 months, which is a lot. Right. And this product was an early stage concept. And we thought that the best thing we could do for the product was to ensure that this validated learning is derived sooner rather than later. And we thought creatively what to do. And we have come up with an idea that we can gather together people in an artificial but still good enough environment. And we have come up with an idea of a hotel. So hotel was the place where you can advertise the product and you can allow people to meet. They can still use software, but very basic software to meet, instead of having a product built for the whole city. And the end conclusion was that suddenly there were so many painful lessons that immediately started to occur. For instance, the provider's quality weren't good enough, or the provider's selection, even like the actual categories of providers weren't good enough. People weren't so interested in the service, or there were segments of people who are interested, extremely interested, and there were segments of people who are not so interested. So all those lessons learned combined, which you may say was sort of a fuck up to the initial vision, because the initial vision was, hey, we have a great providers, we have great service. All of this was sort of very much challenged. Very much challenged. And this allowed Switch actually to pivot from the B2C business to the B2B business, because they have realized it's very hard to come up with a good enough economies of scale for the city. So instead they focused on the corporate wellness. So they still had the same concepts, but because of this big lessons learned that was painful to some parts of their vision, they managed to navigate from the B2C area to the B2B area, and suddenly they have a very good outcomes and people really love them. And that's actually how a initial fuck up to a certain extent, but at the same time courageous fuck up, because this was actually part of them staying very much out of their comfort zone to show the product early enough to people, and to be humble enough to acknowledge that initial part of their value was challenged, fundamentally challenged. So this was a failure that led to the actual ultimate success.
So it seems like it's better to start on a slightly smaller scale, maybe sooner rather than later, and then like put yourself out there to lead to greater things.
Absolutely. There's this mantra, you should get out of the building as often as possible, because if you stay with your vision, if you stay within your comfort zone because unfortunately there's a lot of pleasant feelings that the well-managed product team, they may have a great energy, and this energy may actually be a great thing to cherish.
Right.
So great that you sometimes avoid to speak with people who actually may even have a negative feelings towards the product.
Because it will combust. And then...
So it's like you feel that, I prefer to work with those people because they like me. We have the same vision. We build this great software. But people out there, they may have no reason to buy it. They may actually even don't like it. So this confrontation with the sad truth is some things that people tend to avoid. Right. And Switch was courageous enough to say, okay, I'm out there, I'm going to the battlefield, even though the product is very basic. I want to get out of my comfort zone. I want to meet people. I want them to tell me bad things about my product. I want them to discourage me from building this even.
Right.
But they were actually deriving a lot of lessons.
So we see product development as a two-sided process, because you as product providers and creators may have enough courage, but then also it's your customer that also needs to be courageous enough to kind of participate in the process and put yourself out there.
Absolutely. We work in a triangle. So there's us, there's a client, and there's people.
Right.
So every single part of this triangle needs to be properly taken care of, needs to be given enough courage and humbleness.
Very interesting. Is there another example that comes to mind and can provide some more insight into how to navigate the obstacles?
Yeah, I think there's yet another one. Actually, I like the early validation examples. So maybe I'll bring up an example from the language publishing company that builds course books for children and for adults. And they have hired us to validate the idea of Uber for teachers, so to say. So the product was a platform that on one hand allowed you to have a language learning course, but it was assisted by teachers chosen randomly from the pool. So you may think of it as a Udemy with some curation. So Udemy course with some curation. And as you may imagine, such platform is massive. I mean, you have two-sided aspects of the business. So there's a demand side, there's a supply side. And normally it would take even a year to create such thing. And we thought that the best thing we could do is to really start thinking about the basics of the value and validating the core of the value before we move on to the expensive software development. And what we have come up with as a first experiment was we have actually created a Google spreadsheet that was filled with tasks, and we have put some advert on the Facebook channel of this company to say, hey, we've got a crash course on job seeker English, whatever this was. And we first of all, we wanted to validate the demand for such course. So we have described what are the aspects of this course, what people will get from it, and then there will be some teacher remotely assisting them in their learning. But we didn't want to come up with any hypothesis about software until we have this validation from people. And obviously we worked with teachers to come up with the initial idea of the course, and we have managed to recruit like 15 or 20 people that actually paid for this. And we were accepting that if they don't like it, they will give them the refund, and we'll explain that they are part of the beta process or whatever. So this was also a pretty important aspect of it, that it should be monetizable. So they actually paid. And when they enrolled to this course, which was done in multiple aspects, some of them were done by email, some of them were done with the help of a WhatsApp messenger, some of them were done, I guess, in yet another form. And the end conclusion was that we actually killed the idea, because we managed to realize that actually it's very hard for teachers. So the initial assumption was that teacher can spend like a quality time of 1 hour to curate students, and they can work on their own. And this was, I guess, this fundamental assumption was disproven, because it proved that every single student is different. Every single student requires a bit more of an attention. Managing a group of students, managing a group tasks, it means more than 1 hour. And then the fundamental of the business model for that product was that teacher will not spend more than 1 or maximum 2 hours of their time per student, because obviously of the monetization scheme and everything. And suddenly the whole business model started to collapse, because there was no value for the teacher. The courses will be basically too expensive for people to be purchased. And the assumption that people can be given a small amount of quality time was also sort of invalidated. So sadly, or fortunately enough, we managed to invalidate the idea to such an extent that this was killed. And the good news was that obviously we didn't stop the collaboration of the client, but we just moved on to the next idea. And this was actually what makes us the most proud, that we managed to avoid building software nobody would like and nobody would use. At least this was the outcome of this series of initial early validation steps we took with this product.
So again, our human nature that is likely to kill a product. But I think it's great that you managed to build upon such a failure and in the end created something of value for the customer, but also for the end user.
Absolutely.
And on a more personal note, Peter, is there any mistake that stands out in your mind? Is there any failure you painfully remember?
That's an interesting question. I guess to me, failures or just lessons learned that I make every day are typically around striking a good balance between being courageous, which can be defined by me knowing something or me and the team knowing something from the past experiences where we work on a digital product to say, you know what, this is really something we should change. So having this courage, but at the same time staying humble, because oftentimes what we believe to be the right thing, even though we had some experience from the past, is actually not working for that particular use case, because every use case is different. Every use case has different dynamics, especially human dynamics. And I guess this balance is pretty hard to find. And I guess this is also what makes my job quite interesting and fascinating. Like
Right.
being between ice and fire all the time.
It's a work in process
Absolutely. Yeah.
all the time. And is there any advice you as a CPO would like to give to other product owners?
Yeah, I guess one of this would be around acknowledging, be humble enough to acknowledge that part of the product strategy or product vision is bound to be crazy, and that's nothing wrong about it. At the same time, have enough courage to always get out of the building, always keep validating whether people like the product you build and people actually want to pay for it. So those two aspects of the viability of your business and the desirability of your business, those are the elements that have to be always, even schizophrenically, taken care of without any second thoughts. Yeah.
I think what we can distill from the conversation so far is that there are more expensive mistakes and much less expensive ones, depending on at which stage we find ourselves at. And I think a good advice would be to make the less expensive ones.
Absolutely.
Great.
Make the less expensive mistakes and consider a mistake to be your friend. So befriend your mistake.
Befriend your mistake.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the valuable conversation. I think we can both agree that failures can be friends, as we said, and are valuable in the process. And it's good to talk about them as much as we like to talk about successes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank
you very much.
Thank
It was great.
you. And you guys, thank you all for watching. What was your biggest mistake when developing a product? Share your experience in the comments and don't forget to subscribe our channel on YouTube. See you in the next episode. Bye.